8.2 billion people. That's how many humans we have on the planet. Add in 900 million pet cats and dogs eating as much protein as a human. That's 9.1 billion entities to feed. Now imagine, in 2050, we're going to have 9.7 billion humans, 1.3 billion pets. That will be 11 billion entities to feed. Understanding the food and nutrition requirements of these consumers of the future is going to be essential for the chicken industry to prosper. Now, to help us understand the requirements of these consumers, we're bombarded every day. Newsletters, podcasts, TV, magazines, newspapers, expos, conferences, all delivering a dizzying array of information and events that could affect the future of our industry and our businesses. And in today's world, technology is right at the top of the list. So who here gets industry newsletters, podcasts, maybe some Aviagen information around? Yep, get those. So have you ever felt overwhelmed by all this information piling up around you, wondering what does it all actually mean? As futurist John Naisbitt said, we are drowning in information, but we are starved for knowledge. If you do feel overwhelmed, believe me, you're not alone. As I discovered back in 2017, I'd be talking back in 2017 to my C-suite clients, doing projects with them, and we would get round to discussing the data we were finding, and a conversation would go like this with my C-suite colleague John. John, how do you keep up with all this information that's piling up around you? He slumped down in his chair, not looking happy. Who'd like to guess what he said? He said, Tony, I can't. I have problems to solve, meetings to go to, quarterly results, strategy plans, and you want me to think about what all this stuff means and think 5, 10, 20 years out in the future? Simply not going to happen. I felt his pain. I realised much the same thing, how to make sense of this ever-accelerating amount of information. So over the coming months, I had more meetings with more clients and more colleagues, and I realised that what they needed was a roadmap, something to guide them through all this information that was piling up around them. And I've discovered that the best roadmap to understanding the future of food is based on understanding technologies that affect industry and consumers. Why technology? Well, you cannot talk about food from farm to fork without talking about technology. I mean, food used to be a sleepy technological backwater compared to things like the electronics industry, but no more. Technology is now everywhere in food. But it hasn't always been that way, as I discovered again back in 2017. Like you, I got all my newsletters, and every morning I get up and read them. So it's now Monday, the 3rd of July, 2017. My first nice hot cup of coffee, sit down at my desk, and I start going through my newsletters, and I'm going like, wow, there's a technology I've never seen before. Look, that technology's changing so fast. Look at that consumer trend. I sat back, and suddenly it hit me. In all my 25 years in the food industry, I'd never seen anything like the rate of change that I was seeing at that time. So I dug deeper, and the deeper I dug, the more fascinated I became. And over the coming months of doing my research, I found that a lot of these technologies I was seeing came into certain silos. And that these silos had a lot of these technologies in common. And then I had to work out, okay, what is the key silos of technology that we've got? So what I discovered was that we are now approaching the intersection of 5 exponential technologies driven by 3 accelerated technologies that will determine the future of food for decades to come. But it's not a static roadmap, it's more like a GPS that you see behind me, something that reacts in real time to what's going on. So what I discovered, these 5 technologies, the 5 technologies in my roadmap are alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, genomics, the microbiome, and synthetic biology, driven by our 3 accelerated technologies, AI, sensors, and quantum computing. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that animal agriculture or crop agriculture is going to disappear. Far from it. We're going to need everything in our armoury to feed the world. But just that these technologies are the most influential technologies on the future of food. And they all lead us to our exponential food future. Now you're probably wondering, what is a exponential food future? Well, it's built on 2 key concepts. The first key concept is that food is now technology. As I said, you can't talk about food from farm to fork without talking about technology. They are inextricably interlinked and are going to be for the future. The second key concept is technologies advance exponentially. So who here has heard of Moore's law of computing? Yeah, few people. It says that the number of transistors on a computer chip doubles about every 18 months to 2 years. That's what's given us the powerful computers that we all use today. And that's known as Moore's law. So exponential growth, if you think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, you're out by a factor of 3 if you're thinking linearly. Because the power of exponential technologies is driven just by that, the fact that it's not linear, it is exponential. And a great example of that is portable computing. Here we have portable computing, 1975 style. My friend Mr. Robert L. Gordon here has his hand on the world's first portable computer. I used to have hair like that, but that's a whole other story. Who would like to guess how much that computer weighed? Just the one he has his hand on. Anyone like to give me a number? How many kilos? 40? 40? Anyone else? Then it weighed 23 kilos. Do not put that on your airline tray table. It is not going to end well. Now, this fully spec'd up machine, top of the line, top of the memory, top storage, cost $19,750 US in 1975. That's a staggering $115,333 today. But even more staggering is this top of the range machine came with 64K of storage. Not megabytes, not gigabytes, K of storage. Now, the latest Galaxy Z Fold comes with 10 million times the storage at 1/1000th of the cost, at 1/100th of the weight, and all in less than 50 years. That is the power of exponential change. So that's why it is dangerous to think linearly in an exponential world. That's what I mean by that. Let's have a look at our friend here. Our friend here down the bottom left, they think, yep, I know where the future's going, I can see the data points, and they extrapolate along that nice dotted line. Later on they look up and go, uh-oh, I am not where I thought I was going to be. Because what they thought was a straight line was actually the start of an exponential curve. And that gap between their expectation and reality is called the exponential shock factor. So that's why it is so dangerous just to keep thinking in a straight line that things are going to continue just the way they have in the past. So where do these concepts lead us? Food is now technologies advancing exponentially. The future of food is now exponential. And you may think, as C-suite leaders and owners, that, hey, why do I need to worry about technologies, right? I've got my people in the lab, down in the bowels of the factory somewhere. I've got my IT people. They look after all this technology stuff. Well, at a detail level, that's true. They have skills and knowledge that we don't have. But if you don't understand the technologies that are actually affecting your industry and your business, then you have a problem. You need to understand those technologies. Because if you don't do that, how do you know where to go? Because if you don't know where you are leading, any future will take you there. And it's not a case of maybe it was 20, 30 years ago. There's time. Let's wait. Let's just, we'll give it a bit of time and we'll see what happens. This is the average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500. In the mid-70s, it was 34 years. Round about now, it's 17 years. That's how fast things are changing. So, do you want to be one of the survivors rather than one of the ones that's disappeared? And the situation in Europe is much the same. And again, come back, you might say, well, okay, Tony, this sort of sounds okay, but why should I bother looking at this long-term future over here and worrying about what's going on? Well, the reason we explore the future is so we can make the best possible decisions today. Because if we understand where the future is going, we can then backcast to today and say, what decisions do we need to make today? That means we've optimized our organization for the future. In other words, we make proactive decisions today so the future happens for us, rather than reactive decisions in the future and the future happens to us. Because again, if we don't do that and we don't know where we are leading, any future will take us there. So how do we understand how technologies are going to affect our industry and our consumers? Well, we do that by looking at the power of these exponential technologies. And we're just going to talk about two of those today. One is genomics, the other one is the microbiome. And genomics is, of course, the study of the whole genome of an organism. It could be anything from a human, it can be, of course, a chicken as well. And what we have there is an intersection of nutrition and genomics. You can be well aware of that in chickens, but in humans too, as to how our food affects our health. Now, the biggest breakthrough in genomics was, of course, the sequencing of the whole human genome back in 2001. That cost $100 million US. This 2022 data is unfortunately the latest that's available as of this week, but that is $600 US. It's projected this year to come down to $100 US to have a whole human genome sequence. It's so common that it'll be, do I think I will give up 1 cup of coffee every day this week and have my whole genome sequence so I can see my nutrition? What will I do? What the heck? I think I'll just give up that coffee and I'll have my genome sequence. That is how common it's becoming to have your whole genome sequence and understand its effect on your nutrition. We have a company here called Nutrigenomics, and they will analyze your DNA for you. I've had mine done, and it will tell you things like caffeine metabolism, sodium metabolism. It'll tell you, for instance, with caffeine, I'm a slow caffeine metabolizer. I've taken to have my coffee earlier in the afternoon now, so it doesn't affect me later on in the evening. You can look at your sports, your nutrition, your health. They produce like a 30-page brochure as a result of what they found in your genome. And at the cutting edge, we have soccer genomics. Get your children's DNA analyzed, and they will tell you whether or not they should play soccer. Now, this company is so bleeding edge, I think they've actually died from blood loss. because I can't actually find their website anymore. But whilst we might laugh at that, again, it's a signal that, hey, here's an application that in 10, 20 years' time could very well come true. Our next technology is the microbiome, which is, of course, all the viruses, bacteria, fungi that live on and in our body. And around about 95% of all human microbiome is in the gut, and there's actually 1 trillion human cells and also 1 trillion microbial cells. We're actually only, each of us in this room, half human. So need to feed not just the human cells, but our microbial cells as well. And this is a science that's only really come to the fore fairly recently. Back in 2006, 138 papers published on the microbiome or the microbiota, they're pretty well synonymous, published. Last year, 15,000 on a pro rata basis for 2025. That's how fast this field is growing. And we're finding a huge correlation between our microbiome and our health. We have a company called Viome, who do the same thing that nutrigenomics do for genomes, they do for your microbiome. And our microbiome can affect all sorts of things. It can affect our mental health, it can affect our nutrition, it can affect anxiety, immunity, and everything else. It does that by the microbes producing compounds in our gut, which travels up the vagus nerve to the brain and affects brain function. And what we're finding is that we could only extract a tiny portion of our nutrition from our food if we didn't have our microbiome. And we're also finding that we're all really, really individual in our responses to food, which is why, ever been on a diet and it didn't work for you but worked for someone else? If you look here on the right, our friend Jane ate a cookie, spiked her blood glucose. Right, makes sense. The banana didn't. Lisa, the banana spiked her blood glucose and the cookie didn't. So much for common sense. So that is how individual we are. If you're pursuing a Mediterranean diet as a great diet, blanket diet, maybe it's great, but maybe you shouldn't be eating any bananas. Who knows? So understanding what you can eat and what your microbiome will then process is absolutely essential. And that's what these companies have done. They've correlated nutritional response to the microbiome. And one of the upsides of this could be reduction in hangovers. A company called Z-Biotics or Z-Biotics has invented, they say, a strain of bacteria that if you take that before you go out, we should have got some bottles here for tonight, Daniel, but anyway, it will attack the acetaldehyde byproduct of alcohol metabolism and prevent you from getting as bad a hangover the next morning. So there we are. That could be, for some of us, a great thing. Now let's have a look at our accelerators. And of course, the one that everyone in this room, I'm sure, has either used, is using, or is looking at for their business is, of course, AI.
Wake up, Daddy's home.
Welcome home, sir.
Now, that AI is the AI of CEO of Stark Industries, Tony Stark, from the Marvel Cinema universe. His AI is called Jarvis, just a rather very intelligent system. It looks after everything for him. It looks everything from his personal planning, helping him with his work, running his household, a huge array of other things. And until recently, I mean, an easily usable generative AI like that seemed decades away, something in fantasyland. And then, like all exponential technologies, generative AI sprang onto the scene in the form of ChatGPT. Released on the 30th of November 2022, within 5 days, it had 1 million users, the fastest uptake of any technology ever. Forget Facebook, forget Spotify. And the world would never be the same again. And just to be clear, we're talking about generative AI. We're not talking about traditional AI that we've been using for decades, with its nice, neat tables of data, and its output is determined by explicit human programming. We're talking about generative AI, where the AI learns from the data it's trained on and produces novel output. It finds answers to questions we didn't even know we had. And AI is, probably all well heard before, going to be the most influential technology, possibly of the century, not just for industry, but as we'll see, for consumers as well. Because all these technologies will have a tremendous impact on people. But what about the consumers, right? Technology's only one half. What about consumers? And who is the consumer that we should be concerned about? Now, everybody, of course, talks about what? Gen Z this, or Gen Z if you're Americans. Gen Z this, Gen Z that, Gen Z the other. But if you want to look at the long-term future of 2030, 2040, 2050, then you need to be looking at Generation Alpha. Those born from 2010 to the end of 2024. At the end of last year, there were 2 billion Gen Alphas on the planet. And they were concentrated from Africa, down through India, up across Southeast Asia, into China, Indonesia, and the Philippines. This is what Generation Alpha looks like. It's not the people in advanced food system countries. And so that's what we need to take account of. Looking at Gen Z may be great today, but 10, 20, 30 years in the future, that's not the case. And the thing we need to remember about Generation Alpha is they're not just digital natives, they are technology natives. They have grown up with private companies shooting rockets into space, dancing robots, mRNA vaccines, drones, and probably in their lifetime, a colony on Mars. Now, how will they view technology being used to make their food? Well, of course, most of them are pretty young, so you can't really go ask them what they think about the microbiome analysis being used in their food. But we can look at previous generations. 77% of Gen Zs are comfortable with technology being used to make their food. That drops to 67% for Gen Y. Millennials and boomers are tied at 58%. So if Generation Alpha follows the trend, then we could very well see that they'll be very, very accepting of technology being used to make their food. And the other thing to realize is Generation Alpha are a globe-spanning generation, right? They are technology natives. And don't think that you just look at, oh, I'll worry about the Gen Alphas in my country. No, as I say, you can have an idea on one part of the planet, and within weeks, days, or minutes, it's travelled around the world to every Gen Alpha. And a great example of that love of technology is that 63% of Generation Alphas want technology doesn't even exist. So technology are high on Generation Alpha's values. And a great example of how this can happen are Korean products, K-beauty and K-pop products. As we've seen, they are world-spanning phenomena, even on TV. Squid Games, anyone? And the popularity of boy bands like BTS, girl bands like Blackpink, show just how this new technology native generation will operate. And now you may be thinking, well, look, Tony, they're only 14, right? They've got no money. I'll wait till they're 18 and then we'll worry about them when they start earning some money. Do that, you have missed an entire generation. They know more at 8 years old than previous generations knew at 18 or 80. Who here knows someone or has a Generation Alpha child? Anyone know someone with a Generation Alpha child? Yep. Now, the Generation Alpha parents I've spoken to, They say, yeah, whatever our Generation Alpha child wants to do, the family generally ends up doing it. 80% of millennial parents in a study agreed that their kids frequently affected their purchasing. So while they don't spend their own money, they direct a massive amount of purchasing power. And they're deciding today, do I like your company? Do I like your company? Oh, mummy, daddy, that's a nasty company. I'm not eating any of their chicken. So don't think you can just wait for them to grow up and then throw a marketing campaign at them to address what their values are. They're making their mind up now, and trying to convince them in 5 or 10 years' time how nice you are is probably not going to be a winning strategy. So what's the upshot of all this? What will this Generation Alpha, these future consumers want? They will want personalization. And whether we realize it or not, personalization is everywhere. Who here's got a streaming audio or streaming video service? Yep. Well, if you have, then like me, you get those emails. You like this movie, you might like that movie. You like this artist and their songs, you may like this other artist and their songs. Personalization is everywhere. And find it very, very unlikely that there will be a future where a consumer says, please personalize everything else for me, but not my food. I just want my food to stay exactly the same without any personalization or without any problems at all. Not an impossible future, but I find that to be a very unlikely future. And of course, how people are going to personalize is based on things like bio-wearables. I'm sure many of you in the audience here have a smartwatch or maybe even a smart ring. This one is the Galaxy 6 from Samsung. It will do everything from measuring your heart rate, your sleep, your blood oxygen level. It'll measure your BMI index, give you all sorts of feedback on your health. Because a large proportion of people say if they could get reliable feedback on their health, they would change their lifestyle. So that is the power of a bio-wearable. And of course, if we look at then to say there are other watches as well, there's Garmin, there's Apple and so on, and as mentioned, smart rings. This is the Oura smart ring, and this will measure, again, your heart rate, it'll measure your sleep patterns, it'll measure your exercise, it'll also measure over a period of a month all of your exercise and trends, and blood oxygen level, and skin temperature. It's even waterproof, so you can wear it in the shower or wear it when you're swimming. So we're going to have a massive amount of data. And the latest data, of course, continuous glucose monitors. So this one is the Lingo from Abbott Laboratories. Now, as we know, spikes in blood glucose can be a pre-diabetic condition. So you don't want a lot of spikes in your blood glucose. So using this, you can track the spikes in your blood glucose from your food, and you can correlate them back to the food that you ate. And so you can actually look at what foods you eat, and like we said, find out whether that cookie or that banana was the one that spiked your blood glucose. And this one is from a company called Epicor Systems, and that actually measures the metabolites in your sweat. So it can tell you whether you're hydrated or not. It can tell you what your things like calcium levels and so on. And in the future, they're going to do micronutrients like vitamin C and all sorts of other things just based on the sweat from your body. In the longer term future, we're going to have tattoos. So the one on the top left there is a liquid metal, totally waterproof tattoo that measures your metabolites. One on the top left is an e-skin, powered from the sweat from your body to, again, determine biochemical components. Now, once we have all this data, we need to analyze it, right? This is where something called Harvey and Harvetta comes in. They are virtual physiological twins. They're digital twins, male and female. They analyze 80,000 biochemical reactions, 26 organs, and 6 blood groups and your microbiome to determine what and how food will impact you. So you can imagine that with all this data, it's going to take an enormous amount of computing power. And that is, of course, where generative AI can come in. It can analyze all this data, and it can give people a personalized view on their diet, their health, and their nutrition. Now, with all these trillions of data points every second or microsecond, we're probably going to need our last of our accelerators, which is quantum computing, to give real-time analysis on what's going on. And in the end, what will happen is we'll all be surrounded by an AI shell. That AI shell will look inwards to our body, to our biowearables, to analyze our nutrition and our health, and it'll look outwards to the rest of the world and interact probably with other AIs. Now, you might think, yep, bit far-fetched, Tony. Well, just have a brief listen to this video here from Imran Chowdhury from a company called Humane. They have an AI pin, as they call it now. It's had some problems, which I'll discuss after the video, but just watch how it could turn out.
Show you. Picked up one of these chocolates. Used to eat a ton of these when I was a kid. Can I eat this?
Butter, you're intolerant. You want to avoid it.
So I can't eat these anymore. But what's cool is my AI knows what's best for me, but I'm in total control. I'm going to eat it anyway.
This product was released onto the market in November 2022. Unfortunately, it failed in the marketplace. People were complaining that, oh, I can't read it in bright sunlight. ChatGPT, which was connected to through OpenAI, didn't give me a perfect result. I mean, hello? Remember complaining about that 20 years ago when screens couldn't read them outside? This happens to all new technologies. And let's not forget how far some of these technologies have come that we forget about. Cutting-edge companies often come a cropper in the whole thing. But let's just have a look at the first mobile phone in 1985, the Motorola Dynatax 800X. 33 centimetres long, 9 centimetres deep, 4.5 centimetres wide. It had 30 minutes talk time and 6 hours of standby. That's it. Imagine what it is that we have today in only 40 years. So I wouldn't write off something like the concept of the AI pin very readily. It's a signal of what's coming. Now, I'm sure as C-suite leaders, owners, senior executives, you're wondering, okay, Tony, what's in it for me and my organisation? How's this going to help me and my organisation to prosper? Well, funny you should ask. A gentleman called René Rohrbeck did a study, and in 2018, he followed companies for 7 years, and he looked at their performance. He separated out the companies into 4 categories. Vigilant companies, which did just enough looking at the future to be useful. He had neurotic companies who did way too much paralysis by analysis. Then he had vulnerable companies who didn't really do much at all, and in danger companies who did nothing but just, hey, let's just keep going anyway. When he analysed these companies, vigilant companies were 60% more profitable than their nearest competitors. Who here would like to be 60% more profitable than their competitors? I suspect a few of you. Hand up the front here. Now, it's when you look at increase in market capitalisation, it's even more stark. Vigilant companies had twice the increase in market capitalisation of their nearest competitor. So that is the value. There's definitely strategic and competitive value in foresight application in looking at the future. There is an ROI. And if you are a vigilant company, you've got a 44% chance of being an outperformer 44% of being an average performer and 12% of being an underperformer. I mean, there's no magic bullet. Nothing is certain, but certainly gives you a far better chance of being an outperformer in your marketplace. And what you don't want, if you ignore the future, is to be like Kodak. Remembers Kodak? I mean, a Kodak moment, right, was a happy snap. People running on the beach, children, kids, grandparents. Now it means, a Kodak moment means you've gone out of business. And I'm sure none of us want to see that. And we've covered a lot of ground. But the key thing to remember with all of these technologies is that they are science fact. They are not science fiction. Some of them may take years to come onto the market. Some are here now. Some may take a decade or more. But they're all here right now. It's only their full impact, whatever that may be, that's yet to be felt. And if you think that's a bit far-fetched, remember my friend Mr. Robert L. Gordon here? 10 million times the storage at 1/1000th of the cost, at 1/100th of the weight in 50 years. That's the power of exponential versus linear change. So it's true to say that today's reality was yesterday's science fiction. Because just imagine talking to someone in 2005 and describing our reality here today. Maybe it's yourself in 2005. They would have called it science fiction. They wouldn't have believed you. Go back 50 years ago, go back to 1975 and describe today's reality. They'd probably have had you locked up as a maniac. So that, again, is looking at how rapidly change can happen. And we don't notice it because it changes relatively slowly day by day because we're such linear creatures. But if you jump back 20 years, no smartphones at all. 2007, the first iPhone. So that is what we have to remember. And change is not going away. Whether we like it or not, we're going to continue to be bombarded by an avalanche of information. And technologies are going to be right at the top of the list. But, I mean, it's this exponential rate of changing technologies that makes the coming decades ever more exciting. And it's the attitudes, values, and opinions of Generation Alpha, aided by their generative AI, that's going to determine what this future looks like. That combination of generative AI and Generation Alpha may sound a bit like science fiction, but it really is a high chance of becoming reality. Consumers are changing. Technologies are changing. The only constant is change. And the rate of change will never be slower than it is today. That's why it's more important than ever for organisations to explore and prepare for the future. We've seen the average lifespan of companies is declining. Will your organisations be among the survivors? It's leadership that will make the difference between survival and irrelevance. And the key to survival is going to be engagement with Generation Alpha. Together with their pets, they represent over 2 billion opportunities. So what plans do your organisations have to remain engaged currently and in the future with this absolutely vital generation? Remember, if you don't know where you are leading, any future will take you there. Thank you.